Hi, my name is Richard Leiter, a self-published author of literary fiction, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Thoughts on Writing. Okay, I'm going to give a talk now, which I hope makes sense. It probably won't. I haven't organized it or outlined it before. I'm just going to speak off the top of my head and probably be incoherent. But here goes. There are many books in the world, and some of them are very famous books. I've read a couple, not that many, but I've taken a stab at it. But there are only 3 books that I have read ever, and I've read them all in the very recent past, within the last 2 months. There are only 3 books that I've read that deal with a particular subject, which is just, I don't know how to describe it. It's something that I'm very much drawn to. Maybe there's something going on in me that makes me drawn to these books and to this particular theme. And what I'm talking about specifically is the 3 books I'm talking about are Cosmos by Gombrowicz, which I've done a podcast on, The Death of Ivan Ilyich by Tolstoy, which I've done 2 podcasts on, and now a new book which I've read called The Passion of G.H. by a Brazilian author who I'd never heard of before. Her name is Clarice lispector. These 3 books are quite different than anything else I've ever read. Let's start off, I'm not going to do a book review of all of them, but let's start off with Cosmos. It's the first of the 3 in the link. Gombrowicz, basically, the author of Cosmos, basically states, as I've said before, man is born out of chaos. Chaos is the original. And the moment he is born, man is trying furiously with all of his might, from birth till death, to create form or forms out of that chaos. That's the way that man makes sense of the world. He takes, using his senses and using his brain, using thinking, imagination, he uses his brain to find patterns or forms which then allow him to make sense of life, so he doesn't feel that he is just adrift in this overwhelming, chaotic sea. However, Gombrowicz believes that this is all of these forms are illusory, and they're kind of absurd and funny. It's funny to see the way man furiously tries to construct all of these forms to organize everything, because there's nothing to organize, because the only true reality is chaos. And he illustrates this by the main character in his book Cosmos, who seems to be obsessed throughout the whole novel in taking the slightest thing, the slightest, most trivial occurrence or object, and trying to find all sorts of relationships in an effort to make sense of things. The main character in this book feels is frantic. I mean, this is the novel is kind of an absurd novel. It shows in a very absurd, comedic way just how frantic the main author is, desperate to find sense, to find patterns, to sift through the infinite number of details and objects and stuff in life, and to organize them in some kind of coherent way. And of course, it's impossible. Nobody can do that, including this character. And yet, no matter what pattern or organization we find to defend ourselves against the tidal wave of chaos, it's never good enough. Eventually, whatever pattern or thought we have soon succumbs to an even better thought, and that to an even better thought. In other words, there are always these clues, these enticing clues, which the world is always giving to us, and we have this compulsion, we humans, to organize them. I'm not sure if we only organize them by thinking or not, but thinking certainly is the biggest part of it. Then you have the death of Ivan Ilyich. Now, Ivan Ilyich is different than the main character in Cosmos, in that Ivan Ilyich, well, he's the same, but he's different. He ends up being different. The character in Gombrowicz, the main character in Gombrowicz, doesn't really reach any sort of understanding by the end of the novel. He doesn't reach any conclusions that satisfy him. He's just blindly basically searching throughout the entire novel in sort of like a linear fashion. He doesn't reach this awareness. It doesn't culminate in some sort of an awareness which is the final awareness for him. He's kind of like a rat scurrying along in a rat wheel all the way through it. Now, with the death of Ivan Ilyich, Ivan Ilyich is the same rat scurrying frantically for 99% of the novel. As he becomes sick, ill, and in more and more pain, he begins to reevaluate his life. But he does it in a way in which he wants to justify his former life. He wants to find some meaning in his suffering, but he's not able to do it because he's too busy trying to justify his past life. He's too busy trying to defend himself, in a sense. In other words, he too sees the approaching specter of death. He knows that his illness is incurable and he's going to die. He knows it somewhere inside of him. It becomes ever more obvious as the novella progresses. So he knows that he will soon be absorbed in the primordial chaos of existence. The thing that existed before form did. He knows that he will be absorbed in it, and it scares him very deeply, as it scares all of us. And so he tries furiously to defend himself against it, to stay the moment of execution, if you will. And he really can't do it. In a way, what he's trying to do is maintain the old sense of self that he had. He wants to maintain the same ego that he's always had, the sense of himself as a unique person that he's always had. So he can't really see anything beyond that for most of the novel. And the only reason that he finally does by the end of the novel is because of the incredible suffering that he goes through. Whenever Ivan Ilyich rationalizes, he's met with more suffering and more emptiness and horror. And then he tries to defend himself again. And that too meets only with more suffering. So I guess it's the suffering that keeps reminding him that he's full of crap. Ivan Ilyich. He looks back upon his very conventional, mediocre, selfish life, pretty much no better or worse than the rest of us. And the suffering is what deconstructs the lie of this, the superficiality of it. And it only comes with enormous suffering. So at the end of the novel, he does awaken to something. We don't know what it is, but he has an absolutely stupendous, monumental, ultimate awareness. He lets go of everything in his life. He lets go of his former preconceptions of himself. Again, I suppose that the best way to describe it using language would be he becomes enlightened. And boy, does he ever become enlightened at the end. He says at the end of the novel, there is no more death, as he's about to drop dead. Pretty heavy awareness, isn't it? So again, most of the novella, he is struggling to maintain some vestige of his old self. He's struggling to maintain form. And the form is always being intruded upon by chaos. And it's only at the very end of the novel that he's able to let go of form, of forms, of his delusions about himself. So I suppose it's such a cliched term that's being bandied about these days. It's kind of a hip term to use. Ego death. Everybody's using that word. The death of the ego. But that pretty much describes what happens to him. This is a novel about a person who undergoes an ego death. And when he does, in the middle of his suffering, the suffering never ends, his physical suffering, but he's somehow able to face the chaos ahead of him and seeing it in a whole different way than you and I would. Now, of course, in Cosmos, the main character doesn't undergo any sort of ego death or transformation the way Ivan Ilyich does. He, like I said, he just keeps scurrying from the beginning to the end. And Gombrowicz wants that. He wants to show us just how crazy and foolish it is to have this I guess it's an instinct that human beings have to desperately cling to form or to forms. So these are the first two novels I read that I saw this amazingly same theme. And then, about 2 weeks ago, I read The Passion According to G.H. Never heard of this woman before. And The Passion of G.H. is exactly about the same thing that Ivan Ilyich is and which Cosmos is. It's about a woman who is, from the very start of the novel, you see, with Ivan Ilyich, he doesn't undergo his so-called ego death until he's almost dead, until almost the last page of the novel. However, with Clarice lispector, the main character, the woman, there really is only two characters in this novel: a woman, a fairly upper middle class or well-to-do woman living in an apartment, and a cockroach. These are the two characters in the story. But anyway, the woman in the story, from the very get-go, is undergoing her ego death. She's undergoing she's undergoing a tremendous transformation in herself, which she cannot stop, but at the same time, which she is terrified of. She mentions, the language which lispector uses is very similar to the language that I've heard people who talk about Buddhism use. She's very, and she talks about form and organization in the same way that Gombrowicz does. It's amazing how these three novels seem to be united in this vision. Let me just give you a short quote from The Passion of G.H. She says at one point, "Now I'm going to tell you how I went into that inexpressiveness that was always my blind, secret quest. How I went into what exists between the number 1 and the number 2. How I saw the mysterious, fiery line. How it is a surreptitious line. Between two musical notes there exists another note. Between two facts there exists another fact. Between two grains of sand, no matter how close together they are, there exists an interval of space. There exists a sensing between sensing." Get this. "In the interstices of primordial matter, there is the mysterious, fiery line that is the world's breathing, and the world's continual breathing is what we hear and call silence." That's just amazing. This woman is no faker, no phony. She senses something, the character in this novel, and I guess Lispector does. This primordial line between the interstices. Well, she's talking about chaos, the larger universe outside of her own personal sense of herself. It goes on, just one more short paragraph. "It wasn't by using any of my attributes as an instrument that I was reaching the mysterious, calm fire of that something that is a plasma. It was precisely by stripping myself of all attributes and going on with just my living innards. To arrive at that point, I was leaving my human organization behind in order to go into that monstrous thing that is my living neutrality." That's the quote. In other words, what is the monstrous thing that is my living neutrality? Well, that would be living without your own personal sense of self, without the old person who's constantly seeking for organization, for forms. She says when she says, "I'm not going to use any of my attributes to reach that mysterious primordial place." In other words, she's not going to use her 5 senses, and she's not going to use thought, which is precisely what we all use to have a sense of ourselves. I mean, as far as thought goes, take away thought, and what have you got? For most people, including me, what have you got? You don't have a person anymore. If I wasn't, I've always grown up personally myself. I've never read Descartes, but I remember his famous line, "I think, therefore I am." Well, that kind of describes me, and it probably describes the bulk of everybody else living on this planet. If I don't think, what is there of me? People are always, thinking is of such importance in our hypocritical culture. The more you think, well, the more powerful you are. The more powerful you are, the better job you'll get. The more control you'll have over your life, and the more control perhaps you'll have over other people. So thinking is a way of obtaining more power. It's also a way of having self-worth. I mean, if you take two people, one of whom is considered to be a very thoughtful person, a thinking person who's always generating ideas, and the other one, not so much so. Well, which person are you going to see more worth in? Well, I've always thought that I see more worth in the person who's a thinker, and I would wager that most people think the same thing. So thinking and self-worth are inextricably bound up in our Western European culture. However, Lispector and the character in this Passion of G.H. is saying, I'm not going to use thinking to find this primordial presence. What does she say? The primordial matter, the mysterious primordial matter, which is the interstices, the thing that falls between the cracks. She's not going to use thought or her attributes, as she calls it. As a matter of fact, she kind of recognizes that that's what's prevented her from seeing this primordial matter for her entire life. I don't know how Lispector came to realize all this stuff, because it really kind of blows my mind. I mean, this is a level of perception that I've never encountered before in any book aside from Ivan Ilyich and aside from Cosmos. I mean, I think that you're not going to get this kind of preoccupation with form and chaos from Charles Dickens. You're just not going to get it from him. You're not going to get it from, I've read Thomas Hardy's Tess of the D'Urbervilles recently, which I loved. But you don't get it from him either. I like Charles Bukowski a lot. I mean, who doesn't? He's a lot of fun to read. You don't get it from Charles Bukowski either. I read Death in Venice recently by Thomas Mann again, which I loved. I loved it even more reading it now than I did 50 years ago. But you don't get this from Thomas Mann either. I read Conrad, Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness now after 50 years. And it, just like Thomas Mann, I loved it even more now. What a profound book, and what a beautifully written book. I think my time would be well spent memorizing that book. But you don't get it from Conrad either. What you get from, what you get from Conrad is man's puniness when set against primordial nature, when set against the inexplicable vastness of nature, of the universe, of the cosmos, of chaos. You get that. But you don't get Marlowe or Kurtz. You don't get some kind of a transformation in the way that you do in The Passion According to G.H. I love Humboldt's Gift by Saul Bellow. To me, I've always thought, he's my model. If I could write like Saul Bellow in Humboldt's Gift, I'd be a pretty happy camper. But in retrospect, comparing Humboldt's Gift to these three novels, particularly Ivan Ilyich and The Passion of G.H., Bellow is not at this level either. Bellow, to me, typifies what I've always known in my life. Bellow is the Cadillac of writers when it comes to thinking and to identifying yourself with thought and thinking. And of course, the main character in Humboldt's Gift, the Delmore Schwartz character, Humboldt, well, this is a man who is completely entangled by his own ego. It's what destroys him. He certainly is a thinker. He's thinking every 5 seconds, every 1 second. So Bellow thinks brilliantly throughout the entire novel in a way that I wish I could. He is just so wonderful, so witty, so tripping off of the tongue as he's doing it too. But in comparison to Ivan Ilyich and Clarice Lispector, and to a certain extent Cosmos, these three novels blow Humboldt's Gift out of the water, as far as I'm concerned. Not many people will probably be drawn to this theme, the theme of form and chaos, the theme of the delusion of oneself, the idea that it's one's own self that gets in the way of seeing a larger picture of things. I've been listening to a lot of, Eastern philosophy lately, a lot of talks, podcasts on YouTube. And one thing I've come away with, and this is something that I've always felt, even for quite a while, I've always been attracted to this. The ego is like an insatiable, rapacious beast. It will take anything it can and try to incorporate it into itself to feel stronger, to feel more powerful. I guess this would be Nietzsche's The Will to Power. He says this is the deepest primordial urge of man, to amass more power. And of course, when a person thinks, when he organizes things, when he creates forms, even if there are no forms to create, he is making sense of the world, and he is amassing power. It's his ego which is doing this, though. It's all for the sake of his ego. He cannot seem to go beyond that. I know I can't. I mean, this is second nature to me. I've been grown up. I've been breastfed on this stuff, and I'm beginning to appreciate the fact now that maybe thinking in this particular sense that I'm talking about may not be all that it's cracked up to be. I mean, I'm not going to have a big discussion about thought and the nature of thought now. That's too big a subject. And I'm not saying that one should stop thinking. Thinking obviously has many useful purposes. It's a tool for survival, but I'm not thinking of it in that sense. But anyway, that's another subject. Let's get back to the books. I keep coming back to these three books, particularly Ivan Ilyich and The Passion of G.H. I've heard a few podcasts on The Passion of G.H., and they talk about her being very philosophical and very mystical and so on. Well, to me, the moment I picked this thing up, I realized this is a woman who is battling or struggling furiously against letting go of something and trading it for an even larger view of the universe. And she's very, very ambivalent about it because it's very frightening. All we've known our entire lives is thinking and ourselves being separate from everybody else, and ourselves wanting to amass more power. It's just very natural to us, the way most of us were raised. And this is a woman who is going through this whole process of letting go of all that. And I guess I'm going to end now. I guess I just find it absolutely remarkable that this woman, who was not that old when she wrote this book, was in tune with this. It really blows my mind. So that's it. I think this kind of gives you a state of what my mind is like right now. And I think I'll end it here. Thanks.